us for today's video on the immune system. And this is going to be covering chapter 5 of the biology textbook. And this is the very last chapter. So if you've been following along with us from the beginning, then congratulations, you've made it all the way to the end. And this chapter has 4 sections. It's going to be about the immune system and disease. Infectious diseases are caused by bacteria, protists, fungi, viruses, or parasites. Any of these causes is called a pathogen. And remember that not all bacteria and fungus cause disease. In fact, some of them are helpful organisms that live in our body. We have a mutual relationship with some of these symbiotic organisms, and they can help with digestion, they help make us vitamins, and keep our tissues healthy. The good ones are not called pathogens. So in this chapter, we'll be focusing on pathogens. They're specifically the bacteria, protists, fungus, viruses, or parasites that cause disease. And germ theory of disease is a term for the generally accepted theory that pathogens cause disease. Though the word germ no longer has any scientific meaning, the name is held over from the 1800s when they were first figuring this out. Okay, back from early studies of germs and disease, Koch's postulates are rules for showing that a specific pathogen causes a disease. So his rules were really useful in the early days of studying pathogens for really figuring out how diseases work and what causes them. So now we realize they have some exceptions, but they're kind of an important general idea. So the postulates are this. You have to follow these 4 steps. First, the pathogen must always be found in the body of a sick organism and never in the body of a healthy organism. Then, the pathogen must be taken away from the sick organism and grown in a lab, then introduced to a healthy organism, and then it must get the same disease. So you're showing that you could take that pathogen and make someone sick that used to be healthy. And then the 4th step, you take that second person that you just made sick and be able to isolate the same pathogen from them and show that it's the exact same as the original. Now, there's lots of different types of pathogens, and there's different ways that they can spread. And note that no one pathogen uses all of these methods. Most use 1, maybe 2. So they can spread by coughing or sneezing. They can go through the air and land on a person, from physical contact, or from sharing towels and sports equipment and things like that. Exchange of body fluids through sexual contact, blood, or sharing needles. Contaminated food or water, especially that contaminated with fecal matter, or eating uncooked meat or seafood. Some can come directly from animals. Zoonoses are diseases that can spread from other animals to humans, such as mad cow disease or rabies. And by vectors. Vectors are animals that spread the disease to people without getting sick themselves, such as mosquitoes spreading malaria and ticks spreading Lyme disease. So because there's so many ways of pathogens spreading, there's different ways to prevent them. To help spread the pathogens to yourself, to help prevent the spread of pathogens to yourself and others, wash your hands often, cook your food, and wash raw foods like fruits and vegetables before you eat them. Avoid sharing sports equipment and hygiene items. Note that fungal diseases tend to cause infections right on the skin. And practice safe sex. Condoms help prevent sexual transmission of pathogens. Section 2 is about the defenses against infection. So now that the text has scared us with lists of pathogens and ways to become infected, we'll learn about the body's amazing defense systems. Non-specific defenses protect against everything, not just against a specific pathogen. The body is actually pretty good at keeping bad things out because skin covers most of it, and then cilia prevents particles from moving into the respiratory tract, which keeps many pathogens out. Mucus, tears, and saliva have chemicals that break down bacteria, so all points of entry to the body have some defense. if a pathogen gets through the skin, histamines are released, causing an inflammatory response. So the inflammatory response leads to swelling, extra fluid, and blood bringing extra white blood cells to the area to try to remove the problem. When a virus enters the body, interferons are created, which make it harder for viruses to function, slowing down the infection. And again, these don't fight a specific virus, just in general, any and all viruses. Fever may also be a common result of infection because the change in temperature can slow down or stop the function of some pathogens. So those are non-specific defenses that just kind of fight everything. Specific defenses are the specialty of the immune system. The immune system recognizes cells and proteins that are part of the body and ones that are not. It simply classifies everything as self or not self. It finds anything that doesn't belong and it attacks. The immune system remembers which cells or proteins triggered an immune response before, and if it encounters them later, it begins the immune response very quickly. The immune system recognizes pathogens by looking for antigens, which are certain molecules on the outer surface of the cell or virus. When it finds antigens, antibodies are released. They are proteins that only bind to a specific antigen, and those act as signals to the immune system that there is a pathogen here to destroy. Lymphocytes are white blood cells that are active in immune response. These cells are made in red bone marrow and then move throughout the body fluids. There are many types of cells that are lymphocytes, but they fall into two categories. T lymphocytes deal with body cells that have been infected by pathogens, and B lymphocytes discover antigens that are on pathogens hanging out in the blood or other body fluids. The body has to have many varieties of different T and B cells because each one is only able to respond to one specific antigen. Okay, and we're going to look on the next two slides about the specific responses that can happen from the T and B cells when they find a problem. So the humoral immune response happens when B cells encounter pathogens that are in the blood or other fluids. They bind to the pathogens. Okay, the antibodies on the B cells bind directly to the antigens on those pathogens. And this stimulates the creation of more B cells. And there's two different types. So it makes a whole bunch of plasma B cells, which are cells that pump out antibodies. Those antibodies attach to the pathogens and flag down more immune cells. And then other immune cells will come and destroy it. Memory B cells remain in the fluid even after the infection is gone to look for the same pathogens. And that way, if it finds the same ones again, it's ready to start immune response immediately. Cell-mediated immunity happens when T cells and macrophages, which are other immune cells, battle body cells that are infected with pathogens. What happens is the macrophages come in and completely engulf the infected cells. They kind of eat them, keep them inside. They take some of the antibodies off of the surface and display them on the surface of the macrophage. And this signals helper T cells to get busy. The helper T cells activate some more B cells, activate more T cells that can destroy the infected cell, and make memory T cells to recognize the same infection last time. Okay, so both varieties of this immune response are going to create cells that attack and cells that's job is just to remember for next time. The next section is about fighting infectious disease in general on a nationwide or global scale. So vaccinations are harmless versions of pathogens that trigger an immune response. So we just mentioned how if a bad pathogen gets into the blood or into the cells, the immune system makes memory T cells and memory B cells so that next time it can recognize the threat immediately and take care of it before it becomes a problem. So before the person gets sick, the immune system is there ready to kill that pathogen immediately. And that's what vaccines do. You give the person parts of a pathogen or a weakened pathogen or a dead pathogen that's still going to trigger that immune response, and it's going to cause the immune system to make memory cells so that the immune system is ready. And that way, if the real pathogen does come into the body later on, the immune system's already ready to take care of it before it can make the person sick. This whole thing is called active immunity. Okay, we've created immune cells that are ready to go. And depending on which pathogen it is, active immunity can last a few months or last an entire lifetime or somewhere in between. There's also passive immunity, which is short-term immunity. And in passive immunity, it's not actually making new cells. It's when one individual gets antibodies from another individual. So passive immunity happens naturally when a baby gets those antibodies from its mother. And there's also some short-term vaccines that just transfer the antibodies. So that would be passive immunity. So slowing the spread of infectious disease is obviously a global goal, and a combination of practices has helped slow that spread of disease greatly and greatly reduce the number of deaths from them in the last century or so. So, some ways that's happened. Vaccine programs give people immunity to diseases so that they don't get the disease and spread it. And so far, that's been really successful. Due to vaccines, smallpox has disappeared from the world entirely, and polio has disappeared from most countries and hopefully will soon be gone from the entire world. Only 22 new cases of polio were reported worldwide in 2017. So hopefully someday that will be zero. The next way to fight infectious disease has been ensuring that people have clean food, clean water, and sanitary disposal of waste. These things reduce the amount of pathogens that people come in contact with. And then education about safe practices helps people avoid pathogens. For example, did you know that when you wash your hands, you should scrub with soap for 30 seconds in order to effectively remove pathogens? It's worth the time to wait around for those 30 soapy seconds if it helps you avoid an illness. Medications, of course, help people survive some infections, and there's different kinds. For bacterial infections, antibiotics can be effective. And we've talked before about how antibiotics are only useful for bacterial infections, not viral infections. So antibiotics can't help you with the flu. Antibiotics can't help you with the common cold. For viral infections, there are antiviral medications to help with some of them, not all of them. There are antiviral medications to help with the flu. If you could get on them fast enough, it helps slow down the infection so that your body can handle it better. There's not any right now for the common cold. So, again, for some diseases, there's medications, for some, there's not. And not all infections can be cured. So, for a lot of things, we just have to rely on prevention. So it's important to use available vaccines and take precautions like hand washing and precautions like practicing safe sex. New diseases emerge in human society because pathogens evolve or because humans have new contact with animals or new areas that's going to spread new diseases to humans. And then some diseases seem to be under control or nearly wiped out, and then they reemerge. And the most common reason for this is misuse of medication. So many medications are initially effective, but it's possible for resistant strains of pathogens to develop. This has happened with tuberculosis and malaria and several types of bacteria that are resistant to antibiotics. Diseases can also reemerge because some people refuse to get vaccines or give vaccines to their children, leaving a percentage of the population with no protection against those diseases. And that allows the diseases to continue thriving instead of being eradicated. The immune system has a huge job identifying and removing any threat to the body. And so it's a complex and amazing system, but sometimes things can go wrong. Allergies are an overreaction of the immune system to a harmless antigen. The body treats something harmless as a pathogen and begins an unnecessary immune response, releasing histamines. One example that is present in most people is a reaction to poison ivy. No part of this plant is actually a threat to the body, but most people's immune system reacts to the oils from the plant as if it was a threat. Food allergies, pollen allergies, and an allergy to bee stings are also common. Asthma is an overreaction um, in the respiratory system caused by breathing in particles or by infections, exercise, stress, or some medications. The air passage is narrow, which makes breathing very difficult. As you can see in this diagram showing normal bronchioles on the left and bronchioles under an asthma attack on the right. Autoimmune diseases are diseases when the immune system mistakenly identifies cells or molecules that are supposed to be there as foreign invaders and attacks them. So the body is destroying its own cells. Examples of this are lupus and diabetes 1. And we're going to talk about a specific disease, HIV, which stands for human immunodeficiency virus. This is a virus that causes AIDS, and AIDS is a condition of having a severely weakened immune system. The virus, HIV virus, can hide from the immune system and it attacks T cells in the immune system. So it leaves the body unable to have a specific immune response. And so the body is vulnerable to many, many, many other diseases. A person is said to have AIDS when the HIV has cut the amount of T cells in the blood to 1/6 of the normal levels. HIV can be spread by sexual contact, by breast milk, and by blood. It cannot be cured and there is no vaccine. So the only thing to do is avoid behaviors that could cause it. So it's important to avoid behaviors such as unprotected sex, intravenous drugs with shared needles, and contact with other people's blood. And I do want to note that blood transfusions have been carefully screened since 1985, so patients can't get the virus from donated blood. And HIV and AIDS can't be cured, but in recent years, excellent new medications have made this disease manageable. So decades ago, it was basically a death sentence. If you got it, you weren't going to survive very long. And it's gotten, somewhat better. And just in the last few years, they've had a lot of really good medications that help make it manageable so that you can survive with this disease. And that brings us to the end of this chapter. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to give us a call.